Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Hometown Heroes. I'm Mike Kenichi, and I'm honored tonight because when you think about the Yankee glory years from 1996 to 2003, this man was very much instrumental in everything involved with it. He had to handle so many personalities and did it so well. He's also the editor in chief of Baseball Digest, and he's had a career that spans from the early 80s to the present right now. And I am honored to introduce to you Mr. Rick Cerrone. And Rick, I want to thank you for coming on today. It's a real honor.
Well, thank you, Mike. It's great to be here. I'm going to correct you on one thing. It's really kind of the mid to late 70s, not early 80s, that I really started cutting my teeth in this industry.
Right. So, Rick, before we get into that, one thing I wanted to ask you, because I do believe you were very close with this person for many years. We lost Gerald Williams not too long ago, and he was, when you think about Doc Gooden's no-hitters, people sometimes forget that he made the play of the game in that game, or early, I think maybe first or second inning, to make sure that no-hitter happened. Just talk a little bit about Gerald, because he was a very good Yankee and a very good person.
Well, Mike, I'm so happy that you brought up Gerald because, when I got to spring training in 1996 with the Yankees in a new ballpark, new town, new manager, new GM. I really didn't know anybody. I met everybody for the first time when they gathered in spring training. It was the first time I ever met Derek Jeter or Bernie Williams, David Kuhn, so many other people. And one of the people I met is Gerald Williams. And when I saw that he passed away so sadly, I went and looked up how long was he there? And I didn't remember that we traded Gerald in August or at the trading deadline to the Milwaukee Brewers. And wow, that was such a short amount of time. I know he came back later, but his impact on me was so significant. He was just a gem of a person. And I wrote on Twitter when he passed that he made a very challenging job for someone like me who knew nobody so much easier. I mean, he was such a good guy, such a good person.
Yes.
And that's the way I remember him is, if I named my top 10 Yankees in terms of favorite people and the shortness of the time we were together, if I saw Gerald Williams, I wish I could, a year ago, we would have hugged like we were friends for life. And that's a testament to the kind of person that he was.
Right. And the thing about him was you never heard anybody say a bad thing about him. And if you had to ask Derek Jeter, I would think Derek Jeter would tell you he was one of his favorite teammates too. And again, they were only teammates a short time as well, but that's the kind of impact that Gerald
But they
had.
were, they were best friends, I think, being in the minor leagues together. And I mean, that was, he had boyhood friends. He had a gentleman by the name of Sean Twitty. That was his lifelong friend. But, if you said to somebody who's Derek Jeter's best friend, it was Gerald Williams. So even though Gerald was traded away, I think he still lived in the Tampa area, and they still throughout their lives were close friends.
Right. And, the one disappointing thing is that he kind of left right before that championship, which was unfortunate. But great guy for baseball. And like I said, I was shocked when I saw that, and it really upset me. Yeah,
I was too, and I didn't see it coming. Maybe I should have, but I was not aware of his illness. And God bless him and his family. He will be missed. And we lost a few people that I had made friends with over the years. I mean, with Don Zimmer or Hideki Arabu, we lost. Steve Howe, we lost. So it's just life.
Right. So, Rick, let me ask you, was there a love for baseball when you were a young kid? I mean, is that how you got into it? I mean, when you were a young kid, I mean, did you have a baseball team? Did you play baseball? How did that love begin?
Oh, absolutely, Mike. And, I really can't tell you what got me interested in baseball. I think my earliest memory of baseball was being at my grandparents' house, my father's parents' house. And my grandfather on my father's side was a really big baseball fan. My grandfather on my mother's side became a big baseball fan as I got more involved. But he was a true Yankee fan. And I remember sitting in his living room while he was watching the game in black and white. I can still picture it in my mind. And I was asking him about uniform numbers. Like, what's the purpose of uniform numbers? How do they decide? Whatever. And I remember him telling me Mickey Mantle was number 7 and Roger Maris was number 9. And that was my earliest memory of baseball. But then I went to Yankee Stadium in, I want to say 1963, maybe. So I'm like 8 years old. It's either the Cub Scouts or the Little League. I don't remember. And we're sitting up in the upper deck. And I remember hearing Bob Shepard for the first time doing the lineups, for the Yankees, leading off second base, number 1, Bobby Richardson. Yeah. And I'm like, wow, I never knew they announced lineups. They didn't do it in the Little League. And his voice was so reverent and so impactful that I thought, this is something really important. So I was hooked right away. I remember being devastated when the Yankees lost the 64 World Series to the Cardinals. Game 7 was played while I was at a Cub Scout meeting, and we raced home to try to catch the end of the game, and we got there too late. The game was over. The Yankees had lost. But I was hooked then. And here's an interesting thing, Mike, in my story. Every year I paid the 50 cents, and I took home a Yankee yearbook. And I read every single page. Here's Whitey Ford's page, Mickey Mantle's page, Clete Boyer's page, Al Downing's page. And in the back of the book, there was always the same things, on the way up. The funny thing was the guys on the way up never got up. I don't know whatever happened. I don't know whatever happened to Chet Trail and Freddie Frazier, but they never made it to the Yankees. But anyway, so also in the back of the book was a page that was like the team behind the team. And there was a picture of the front office, and it was like a class photo. There might have been 25 people in this photo, and which is kind of funny today when there's 300 people that work for the New York Yankees today. And I would look at each one. This one's accounting. This one's ticket sales. And there was a gentleman in the picture, and his name was Bob Fischel, and he was the director of public relations. And then I would watch games and I would start hearing his name. Like Phil Rizzuto would say, oh, Bob Fischel just came into the booth to tell us that home run by Joe Pepitone put him 15th on the all-time list. Okay, Bob. And I'm like, that's a pretty good job. So I aspired to have that job when I was very young, because the first week of my sophomore year at Yorktown High School in Yorktown Heights, New York, I was not looking forward to my sophomore year because I was such a bad student at the time that I had to take 2 courses from my freshman year over again in the summer just to get the sophomore year. That's not fun. Waiting for your friends are going to the pool and you're waiting for the bus to go to another a neighboring high school for 2 courses that I don't remember what they were. But something happened to me the first week of my sophomore year. My guidance counselor from my freshman year was named the principal. Now, that meant nothing to me. I mean, he was a nice enough man, but I wasn't devastated. But like, who's my guidance counselor going to be? So I'm notified that my guidance counselor is going to be Forrest Buddy Dowds. I knew who that was. He's the football coach. Mm-hmm. His father was the first ever coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So this man resonated with me right away. So the first week of school, I have a meeting with him, and he's looking at my grades, and he is not happy. And he finally looks at me, and this is a true story that I remember like it was yesterday, as does Mr. Dowds. And he looks at me and he says, what do you see yourself doing when you're a grown-up? And Mike, I know at the time, in that moment, whatever I answer him, I want to be a firefighter like my dad, I want to be a doctor, a lawyer, an airline pilot, and a plumber, whatever it is, he's going to say, well, you're probably going to need a high school diploma for that. And the way you're going, it's not likely that you're going to get it. But my answer surprised him. My answer was, that's easy, coach. I'm the public relations director of the New York Yankees. Yeah. And he was taken aback. And I explained to him that there's a man who has that job. His name is Bob Fischel. And here's what he does. He does the press notes. He does the credentials. He does the yearbook, the game program. And I know I'll never grow up to be Mickey Mantle, but there's no reason I can't be Bob Fischel. So he said
Right.
to me, well, I'll make you a deal. If you can get your grades up and keep them up, do you think you can do for my football team what this Bob Fischel does for the Yankees? And my answer was, well, when do I start? So the next day, I'm the public relations director of the Yorktown High School football team. And then I added the basketball team and the baseball team. And that's where it started.
Wow. So it's interesting because I mean, you always have to start somewhere small. And I mean, you you think in high school it's not a big deal, stuff like that, or college, but it's really where you kind of, sink your teeth into things and kind of get that experience. Even though it's different from the professional level, it gave you that type of experience that you would need going forward.
Well, I think the mistake, and I teach a course at Iona College in the summer, and I'm a guest lecturer at many local universities, Rutgers and St. John's and different places. And I can tell you that when I look at the students, I know the ones that are going to be successful because they're the ones that have already started their careers. Now,
Yes.
I'll tell you a very quick story. I told my story just like I'm telling you, and a student at St. John's raised his hand. He said, Mr. Cerrone, your story really resonated with me because my dream is to be the assistant general manager of the Los Angeles Lakers. And do you have any advice for me? I said, well, what is it you're doing? Tell me what well, I'm taking this course and I'm going, no. Outside of your classroom experience, what are you doing with the basketball team? What are you doing? And he says, well, right now, nothing. I said, well, then my advice to you would be get off your ass.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that the general manager of the LA Lakers is walking into this class saying, is anybody here interested in being an assistant GM? You got to make it happen. You got to chart your course, right? Your journey,
Yeah.
Get started, find a way to do it. And now today, back then, I mean, what was I going to do? I mean, I tried to write for as many newspapers as I could, but that wasn't easy because somebody had to, let you do that. Now,
Right.
being the PR director of the Yorktown High School football, well, that got me to my next step because I met a man named Stanley Shallett, who was the sports editor of a local paper, and he let me write the stories. So another happenstance, just like getting Buddy Dowds was happenstance, maybe it was somebody, my grandfather up there looking down. Stanley Shallett tells me my senior year that he's moving to DeKalb, Illinois, to be the sports editor of the DeKalb Daily Chronicle. Okay, see you, Stan. I'm on my own. Now I'm looking at colleges. No one's going to take me. I'm probably going to end up going to Westchester Community for 2 years. He calls me back a couple of weeks later. And he goes, hey, listen, you need to come out here because there's a major university here, Northern Illinois University, up and coming sports program. Well, I was aware of that because like the week before, their basketball team had beaten 5th ranked Indiana by 19 points in Bobby Knight's first year. So that kind of resonated. They had an unbelievable player named Jim Bradley. So I went out there and looked at the school. And of course, I'm with Stanley Shallett. So they're rolling out the red carpet. I'm in the basketball office. They're like recruiting me.
Yeah.
They get me in to Northern Illinois University with something called the Chance Program. And the next thing I know, I'm at Northern Illinois University. And then I'm the sports editor of the student newspaper. I'm the sports director of the radio station 1 year. So it was, for me, Northern Illinois University was my Disneyland because it had everything that I needed to become to get to my destination.
Right. And what it seems like to me, Rick, is you were willing to do anything you had to do to get to that next step. So, I mean, if you had to start off small, if you had to be a sports editor, which is a very big responsibility, but you were willing to do whatever you could to get to that top goal that you were trying to reach.
And that's what you have to do. You can't just sit back and feel like you're owed that job or what. You've got to go out and build up a resume. Listen, when they came to me in my junior year in high school and said, hey, we need someone to do the PA for the wrestling tournament. Can you do the PA for the wrestling tournament? Well, I wasn't going to say no, but maybe I thought that, Bob Shepard was the voice of Yankee Stadium. Well, maybe someday Bob Shepard will get laryngitis or something, and that happened. Bob
Yeah, and you
Shepard
did
one day
do
had
games. Yes.
laryngitis, and
Yeah.
who has to step in and do like 3 games? Me.
Yeah.
So, I didn't aspire to be a PA announcer, but I didn't turn down the opportunity.
Right. So, Rick, let me ask you this. I think in your early 20s, maybe middle 20s, you were doing public relations for the commissioner's office, correct? I mean,
Well,
so go ahead.
well, the first thing I did, and again, happenstance, I did an interview when I was the sports editor of the Northern Star at Northern Illinois for 3 straight summers, the summer sessions. I wanted to stay out there. My girlfriend was out there, so I wanted to stay. So I took 2 classes, 6 credits in the summers for 3 years, and I was sports editor of the Star, which at that time in the summer published 3 days a week. Now, try filling 2 pages 3 days a week when nothing's going on. Well, you do a football preview, you do a story on the, an old team, but you had to find things to write about. And I found a guy that lived right here in my local town, Yorktown Heights. His name was Mike Aronstein, and he was making baseball cards in his basement, and he was selling them. But because he bought photo collections, and the man was a genius. So I'm out at Northern Illinois University, and in my mailbox, I get this magazine that he apparently had started called Collectors Quarterly. So now I graduate in August of 1976. I come home, and Mike calls me, and he says, I need you to come over to my house. I need your help. He had published 3 issues of this Collectors Quarterly. He wanted to do the 4th one and be done with it. He didn't want to do it anymore. It wasn't working out. He didn't get as many subscribers as he thought. Whatever his reasons were. So his editor went off to college. So his editor was a high school senior. Now, you might know the name of his editor. It was Keith Olbermann.
Oh, wow.
To be a legendary sports kid. So Keith goes off to Cornell, and Mike gives me all this manuscript, and I got to put together this magazine. Remember, there's no computer, so you're laying it out, whatever, getting the photos, sending them off. So I did this, and I said, boy, this is really great. I would much rather do this than what I'm doing, because I didn't go from NIU to the New York Yankees or the Daily News or whatever. So I convinced Mike to keep the magazine going, but to change it from Collectors Quarterly to Baseball Quarterly, because at the time, there was no full-size magazine. There was just Baseball Digest, which was a little digest size. So I became the editor of Baseball Digest, and then I bought Mike out a year later for $10, and I became the editor and publisher, and everything kind of rolled from there. That was like as I said to somebody at the time, at the very least, it's a very expensive resume. But I mean, Mike, I built this magazine up to national recognition. I mean, we created the MVPs for the AL and NLCS.
Yeah.
Because the only way we could get publicity was through PR stuff, a different kind of like our awards. Our players of the year were voted upon by the managers. So the players were like, wow, I'll come get your award. So that really that's where I learned the trade and everything. I made so many contacts. I'm working with Bob Fischel. I'm working with league presidents, with the commissioner. So after 5 years, I couldn't go any further with the magazine because I couldn't get advertising. I didn't have enough circulation. They didn't know there weren't enough products devoted to people who liked baseball. Not like today. And it's funny, today I'm doing the same thing. I'm trying to get advertising for Baseball Digest. But I made enough contacts that when I left Baseball Digest, a job opened up in the commissioner's office under Bowie Kuhn. And it was as low a job in the PR department as you can get. I mean, what I would do in the morning was Xerox box scores, cut out the news stories, distribute them. Wow. I was the low man on the totem pole. But, you take your steps. And then when Peter Ueberroth came in, he kind of elevated me. He sought my counsel more. And I got to tell you, I was involved in some pretty unique and exciting things at the commissioner's office.
Right. And that's not even, it doesn't matter how low you might have been when you're working for the commissioner's office. You know that that's a that's a good start, and that something big could happen eventually, and you could always benefit from that
Well,
time being there.
you're exactly right. The man that hired me, the head of the department, was a man named Bob Weers. And I remember Bob telling me in the interview process that, you were editing and publishing your own national baseball magazine. Isn't this going to be a big step back for you? And I said, well, sometimes you have to take a step back to take steps forward or something like that. But I really wanted that job. And again, that was kind of like another launching pad to get to the next step. But I never lost sight of wanting to be the PR director of the Yankees. Never.
Right.
So even if I'm at the commissioner's office, when that job opened up, and it opened up like every 2 years, because, when I was a freshman at NIU, the Yankees were bought by a relatively unknown shipbuilder from Cleveland by the name of George Steinbrenner. Yeah. And in the 24 years between that moment and my getting the job, he had gone through 12 different PR directors. As George Costanza on Seinfeld said, he fires people like it's a bodily function. And most of them were PR directors and managers. So, I probably applied for that job at least 3 or 4 times in that 24-year span.
Right. And we're definitely going to get to George because, he's an interesting character for sure. Let me ask you this, though, Rick. One of the things I've always enjoyed, and I've heard you on this man's show many times, but around like 1986, 87, I believe you did a show called The Sports Connection with Richard Nair. And one thing I want to say about Richard Nair that I think is a little unfair sometimes is he doesn't get enough credit for the contribution that he's given to WFAN, because he's been there since they started that. Yeah, day one. And he's a great weekend host. And the other thing about him that I really like is when it's a real quiet sports day or sports month, he could implement music in there, talk about some great rock bands and stuff like that. But to me, he's one of the heart and souls of that station, and he deserves a lot more credit than maybe he gets.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I talked to Richard today, and he asked me to come on his show over the weekend. And with baseball being in a lockout, he didn't want to focus on the lockout. So he said, we may end up talking about the Beatles. So
yeah,
Richard is still Richard. But, I was at the commissioner's office for 5 years, and I really felt like there was no place else to go for me. I wasn't going to be the director, because it seemed like, and I'm basing this on one experience, when Bowie Kuhn transitioned to Peter Ueberroth. Well, Peter Ueberroth brought his own PR director. He hired his own. So I'm thinking that, well, when Peter leaves, the next guy will bring in his own. Now, that didn't ultimately happen, because the man that Peter brought in, Rich Levin, was there for 20, 25 years. But I made a decision that there's no place else to go here. So another happenstance happened to me, where a woman who I had met a couple of times at various functions, that was the promotions director for WNEW AM and FM in New York, 2 very powerful stations, asked me to have lunch with her. And she said, I'm not going to tell you what it's about, but I'm going to tell you that it's going to change your life. Well, you've got me a little intrigued now. So we went out, we had lunch, and I never forget the words she said. She said, we at WNEW believe that the future of AM radio is sports.
Wow.
Well, this is before FAN, whatever. So they wanted to acquire as many sports properties as they could. They had Seton Hall basketball. They had the Giants, Penn State football. They got the MLB package because CBS didn't want it. And they wanted a 3-hour-a-night show to anchor all of their coverage. And I would have a blank palette, to create this show, except for one thing is they've already hired a host, because Richard Nair had been moved off of the morning DJ role on the FM, and they were going to give him this hosting. Okay. So, at that time, there were 2 other sports talk shows in New York, both 6 to 9 or something. Dave Sims had one on WNBC. Art Russ Jr. had one on and Art Russ was a mentor of mine. I was on his show many, many times. So I took that job and I met with Richard and we kind of mapped out the show. And, Richard came up with the idea that every 20 minutes we would have updates.
Oh,
And
okay. Wow.
when we took that to management, they thought we were nuts. But they've done updates every 20 minutes now since we started it in 1987. We had reporters for each sports. We had the Yankee report, the Mets report, the Giants report. We had Peter King was our NFL guy.
Oh yeah.
Bob Papa did our updates. It was his first job. It was really a great show. It was very different than the others because the shows that we inherited were basically a man and a phone and maybe a guest. We did a lot of other things. We were one of the first stations to go to a Super Bowl when the Giants went to the Super Bowl in '86. '87 was the Super Bowl. I went out there with Dave Jennings, and we were in the lobby of the hotel, and we were on one side of the lobby, and Dave Sims from NBC was on the other, and that was it. But I got to be honest with you, I really wanted to work in baseball. I wanted to work for a team. Yeah. And, 6-7 months into the Sports Connection, I'm told that the Pittsburgh Pirates are looking for a vice president of public relations. And I put my name in the hat. I talked it over with my wife, and it was a difficult move. My wife worked in Major League Baseball at the commissioner's office, so asking her to move to Pittsburgh. But we did it, and it was a grueling interview process. I had never experienced anything like that. And somehow I got the job. And I would spend the next 6 years in Pittsburgh, and it was probably the most wonderful experience of my life.
Right. And what I think was really enjoyable as well is you got to see guys develop like Barry Bonds, Bobby Bonilla. Andy Van Slyke was a very good player. And, of course, former Yankee Doug Drabek had a Cy Young season, I believe, 1989 or 1990. So those Pirate teams, I always say they were the greatest team never to win a championship because they had 3 great years where they were you could put them anywhere.
And it was an experience that can't be duplicated. I mean, Doug Drabek remains a great friend to this day, and Doug and his wife Christy. We saw their kids born and grow up. They were over at our house on weekends for barbecues. Slaught and Michael Lavelle, Jay Bell, and Brian Fisher and Jeff Robinson. We would go to movies together, and we would go over to each other's house for barbecues. You don't really do that today, but we were a small town. When I got there, the mission was to this is what the president of the team told me. We need to convince this market that we're going to be here for another 100 years, because that was the year I joined was their centennial season. So that was the mission. And the 1988 Pirates surprised the baseball world. We're in the pennant race right down to never forget the Monday night game in 1988 against the Mets, 54,000 people. And Al Michaels is showing the crowd, and Al Michaels says, "Are we really in Pittsburgh?" And that was like the greatest compliment that we could ever be paid. We won back that community, and then we got really good, and we just didn't have any luck in the whole season. And that 92 loss, the Francisco Cabrera base hit, and knowing we were going to lose Barry Bonds, after that season, we had already lost Bobby Bonilla the year before, but we still had Barry. Right. But, it was great times, and everything has an expiration date.
Right. And I think obviously it didn't hurt Barry, but I really believe Bobby leaving was a mistake for Bobby, because he did okay with the Mets. He had a couple good years, but he never was the same player afterwards. And I really believe that had he stayed in Pittsburgh, it was his own identity, his own team. I really believe he may have had a Hall of Fame career had he stuck around more.
Well, listen, I can't speak for Bobby. He did what he thought was best, or perhaps what his agent thought was best. But I mean, he owned that team. He owned that town. I mean, he was beloved. And then he became, persona non grata in Pittsburgh because he went to the Mets. But, yeah, I would definitely say his career would have had a different arc had he stayed in Pittsburgh.
Right. And let me ask you this, Rick. The job that you do, it could be fun, but it could also be stressful because the media wants to talk to these guys. And sometimes these guys don't always want to talk to the media. I mean, they don't want to be bothered sometimes. How difficult was that for you to try to line people up to talk to these guys and stuff like that, press conferences, everything like that? I mean, was it stressful at times for you?
Well, yeah, it was very stressful at times because let's talk about New York. Although there is a good story from Pittsburgh about this very thing, but in this was my goal. This was my objective. This was my mission statement. I had to have everybody work together because if I was completely on the side of the writers or the media and overwhelmed the players, then that's not good for the team.
Yeah.
I'm completely on the side of the players, as some PR people are. I don't get the benefits of the coverage. I don't let the media do their job. So I tried to create an environment where everybody can do their jobs without a lot of stress. I don't think there's a lot of players that know that I did this. The David Cohns, the Mike Messinas, the Roger Clemens. They saw that you're trying to create the best atmosphere for us to do our jobs. And
right.
The same thing with the writers. Although I don't know that the writers saw it because they didn't see the things I did on their behalf. But I mean, many times I had to talk to players about, hey, what you're doing is not the right thing. I mean, I had a pitcher after a game. The writers are clustered around his locker like 30 minutes after the game, and I'm not going to name the player, but where's so-and-so? I go in the training room, he's sitting in the players' room. I said, hey, you got a big crowd at your locker. He goes, tell them I'll get them tomorrow. Well, they don't need you tomorrow. They need you right now. I had another player, a star pitcher, answer 4 questions and walk away, say, okay, I'm out of here. And then when one writer said, hey, I got questions here, he goes, I'm not standing here all night. Well, the next day I'd have a talk with them. Of course, they didn't yell at the player. The writers yelled at me.
Yeah.
But the next day, the player said, you're pissed at me, aren't you? I said, no, I'm not. But I want you to know that you told 33 members of the media last night, because I counted them, that you don't have any respect for what they do. Well, right. How long am I supposed to stand there? And I said, well, how about somewhere between 4 questions and all night? Let's try to find a happy medium. And by the end of the conversation, he said to me, all right, I'll make you a deal. Let's do this. You're always there when I meet the media. I said, yes, sir. And he says, when you nod, I'll know it's time that we're done. I said, perfect. And that's the way we did it, and it worked out great. Some players need to be, they need more guidance than others.
Yeah.
Now, you take a Derek Jeter. When people ask me, hey, what was Derek Jeter like? And I'm like, well, he basically had no use for me. What? You didn't get along with him? No, we got along great. But he didn't need the service that I was there to provide. He didn't need someone telling him what time something. It's like if you told Derek Jeter that 3 days from now you're doing the Sunday night conversation with ESPN, or you're meeting a Make-A-Wish kid, or whatever you're doing, he doesn't need to be reminded. Now, I certainly did. And sometimes you get like, do I really need a note? Do I really need this memo on my thing? You don't think I remember? He would, but I mean, I will tell you, Mike, that in the 11 years that I was with the Yankees, I never saw Derek Jeter do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. He handled every situation above and beyond what he was. Now, the writers will say, well, he never really gave us anything. But Derek Jeter knew that after every game, he needs to be at his locker, right? And I will also tell you that I was very good at screening requests, right? So if I can't remember a time that I went to Derek with something like if I get, hey, Penthouse wants you to be their interview. I'm not going to Derek Jeter with that.
Yeah.
But whatever I went to him with, he never said, nah, I'm not doing that. He always respected my judgment and did basically what I suggested. I'll give you another example of something that people don't know, like about Roger Clemens. Now, when we got Roger Clemens, we're like, oh, do we really need this? We're bringing in Roger Clemens. God, everything's going so great. We just won 114 games. Well, let me tell you about Roger Clemens. He was there about 2 days, and I went up to him and I said, Roger, I've probably gotten 50 requests for your time from various media, whatever. Now, I've gotten rid of most of them, but I got 11 that I think you need to consider. He goes, well,
Yeah.
write them down, right? What they are. Give them to me. I'll take them home, and I'll get back to you, and I'll let you know which ones I'm doing. I said, perfect. As he's leaving the ballpark, I give him the yellow legal sheet with the 2 pages, whatever. Puts it in his pocket, goes off. Next morning in the locker room, calls me over, hands me the piece of paper. I open a piece of paper. Under every single one, he says Friday, 8 a.m., Thursdays, 6 he had every one.
Oh, wow.
Time. Didn't turn one of them down, and he did every single one of them. I mean, he was a pro. David Kuhn was a pro. Mike Messina was a pro. Not really outgoing. Like, didn't seek out the media. We had a lot of professionals, especially in that 5-year window from 96 to 2000 or so. They all got it. And listen, they had a great leader in Joe Torre. I mean, he wasn't going to put up with anybody going off the rails or anything. And he called out players quietly for things they might have done. So, but I can't emphasize enough that was my mission statement. Create a very, one of the greatest compliments I ever got was from Kurt Gowdy Jr., who now runs SNY. And he won't remember this, but back in like 1988, ABC was in, I think he was working for ABC at the time. It might have been that Monday night game. And they were getting interviewed. They were doing this. And he goes, Rick, you got a great room. I said, what do you mean a great room? He goes, this group of guys, they're just so great to work with. And that's how I felt about the Pirates. And that's how I felt about the Yankees.
Right. So, Rick, let me ask you, let's start with 96, your first year. What a season to kind of start your first year as the PR guy for the Yankees. I mean, everything seemed to go right that year. And there were things probably behind the scenes that were a little stressful at times. But for the most part, I mean, it seemed like every guy on that Yankee team was unselfish. They did whatever Joe Torre wanted them to do. Because I look at Wade Boggs, and he's a perfect example. He didn't really play a lot in that World Series like I think he would have hoped. But he never, maybe he was upset privately, but he never showed it publicly. He did everything that a professional is supposed to do. And I think he's one example of the unselfishness of that team that year.
Well, I got to take issue with one thing you just said, though, that I got there in 96 and they went on, they won the World Series and everything went. You think that was a coincidence? You don't think I went in there and basically, I was basically George Costanza. But anyway, you're right. And I think the person most responsible for that was Joe Torre.
Yeah.
People will say, well, he was in the right place at the right time. No, he was the right person at the right time.
Right.
He was what that team needed. He was a great buffer between George Steinbrenner and the clubhouse. He wasn't really a buffer between George Steinbrenner and the general manager.
Yeah.
Because I think Bob Watson had a tough go of it. What a wonderful, another person we lost.
Great guy too. Yeah.
But you talk about a prince, Bob Watson. But Joe had this way of there's a story, and people have said to me, oh, that didn't happen. Well, I was the only other person there that saw this happen. So we lose the first game of the World Series. We get drilled by the Braves.
Yeah,
and
it was bad.
I'm standing in the hallway, and George Steinbrenner pokes his head. He walks around the clubhouse, which was kind of a rare thing, but it was the World Series, and he was going to be present. He puts his head, he walks into Joe's office. Joe's sitting at his desk and says, "Go get him, Joe. We need this one tonight." And Joe says something like, "Yeah, I don't know. The layoff, I'm not sure where we want to be right now with that layoff. I'm not too sure about tonight's game, but don't worry, boss. We're going to Atlanta. That's my town. We'll take 3 straight there. We'll come back and we'll win it for you next Saturday." And Steinbrenner turns around and looks at me like, did he just say that? And he just shakes his head and walks away. That is a true story. And, you know, Joe was great for me in that I was taking over a job that I knew I could get fired at any moment, because it's not going to be a joyous ride based on history. Okay. And I remember Joe doing interviews in that spring training talking about, this is like bonus, you know, bonus money, bonus, because I've been fired before. What can they do to you? I can't do this job thinking about getting fired. So all I kept saying was, whatever happens, this will look great on a resume. You were the PR director of the New York Yankees. It doesn't matter if you were there for a month, a year, 2 years. Yeah. I never expected to be there 11 years under those circumstances. And quite frankly, Mike, I shouldn't have been there 11 years because he never fired me. But the 3 or 4 times in 1 year that I quit, to him, he probably should not have taken me back, because I didn't handle certain situations, but that's what he liked about me. I mean, from day one, I think he saw, oh boy, this is going to be interesting, because I went right back at him. But there was something I did that I think helped me. If you go back to 1977, when I had the magazine, the Yankees won the World Series in 77. And I landed an interview with George Steinbrenner in his office for something we called the baseball interview or something. It was like ripped off from Playboy, you know, Q&A. We still do it in Baseball Digest. I brought that back to Baseball Digest. So I'm in his office and I asked him a question, and I listened to the tape a while back. I still have the cassette tape. I just don't have anything to play it on. But I listened to it. And I'm like, man, I can't believe you asked him these questions. And one question was about his management style. I don't remember, but it was about his management style. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, Rick, there are 2 types of leaders. Some men are Pattons and some are Eisenhowers. And I'm a Patton. And you know what he meant by that he was not the administrator. He was the vocal, vociferous guy. So I remember walking to my car, and I remember I want to be the PR director. I might be the editor and publisher of Baseball Magazine, but I'd give that up in a heartbeat to be the PR director of the Yankees. And I'm walking to my car in the parking lot on that cold November night, and I said to myself, if you ever get this job, that's how you will play this. He's General Patton, and you're like a lowly corporal. And when I got the job, he was General Patton. And I answered the phone, yes, sir. I started every conversation, sir, if I might. Sir, if I might make a suggestion. Sir, I cannot allow you to do that. You know, sir, you may have to find yourself a new media relations director. But I got to tell you something, that I would not have wanted to work with anybody else, because I truly loved the man then, and I love and miss him now.
Well, what I always say when I think of George is this: he was a guy who had a real big heart, but sometimes he just didn't always act like the nicest person. But deep down, he really was a good guy who just, you know, if somebody went 0 for 4, he might trade him because he got frustrated. That happened a lot in the 80s. But I never looked at him as I think sometimes he gets a little stereotyped as being this heartless human being. I don't think that's really who he was deep down.
Oh, he was not a heartless human being. I mean, I saw many times, but he always told me, don't ever tell anybody about this. If you do something for someone and more than 2 people know about it, you did it for the wrong reason. Yeah. I saw him do so many generous things, so many above and beyond things. But, you know, I'll never forget, I get the Yankee job in like late January of 96, and I'm in my office and we had Yankee Fest, and a week or 2 goes by and I've never heard from George Steinbrenner. Now he's down in Tampa. They moved the office to Tampa. I haven't heard from him. Now we go to spring training, and first couple of days go by. This is a piece of cake. I've not even met George Steinbrenner. So one day in the lobby of the hotel, a lobby of the ballpark, Legends Field, now Steinbrenner Field, there are these 2 elevators. And if you're coming around the corner and you hear the elevator ding, you'd yell, hold that. So I hear the ding and I yell, hold that. and I get in the elevator, and there's a man with his hand on the button, looking like somebody just took a shot at him, and it's George Steinbrenner. And he is not happy that whoever this guy is, right? It wasn't like I walked in, he said, "Hey, Rick, how you been?" I hadn't seen George in many years. So I sheepishly go to the back of the elevator. He pushed, and I could see he's fuming. And the press box is on 3. His office is on 4. So I said, "Could you hit 3, please?" And so I said, "Sir, I probably should introduce myself. I'm Rick Cerrone. I'm your new media relations director." Well, he lights up. "Oh, Rick, how are you? Good to see you again. Oh, my goodness." And then I'll never forget what he said. He goes, "Len Berman says great things about you." Now, Len Berman was a great sportscaster for WNBC. Yeah. I don't know what Len said, but thank you, Len. So he goes, "You need anything? Everything going? How's everything going?" And he's being, "Okay, well, go get him." All right. He basically sends me off to the 3rd floor. I would have run through a wall then. I'm like, this is, next morning, Mr. Steinbrenner wants to see you down in Max's office. Now, Max ran the lunchroom, the dining room in spring training. Now, remember, I had been there like 3 days. I didn't build the ballpark. I didn't design it. I didn't create he's sitting there with this list. And he says, "Would you want to explain this to me?" I said, "Yeah, it looks like the signatures of everybody that ate lunch today at Max's Cafe." He says, "Yeah, well, we're giving free lunches to the media. What's that all about?" I said, "We're not giving free lunches to the media. Apparently you're giving free lunches to the media because I just got here. You want me to go close the room? I'll go close the room. You want to charge him $5 for lunch? I'll charge him $5 for lunch." And Mr. Steinbrenner looked at Max and said, "This guy's going to be a problem." He didn't say that, but the look on his face. So he basically, "All right, get out of here." And that's the last I ever heard of the lunchroom.
Wow, that's a pretty good story. Let me ask you this, Rick. I'm sure you dealt with different personalities over the years. Like I said, it's not easy when you got to get these guys lined up for interviews. I think of guys like David Wells, who he had a very strong personality, good pitcher, and he definitely liked being in New York, but I'm sure he wasn't always easy at times. And you brought up Roger Clemens, and I was glad you did because I was a big Clemens fan when he was on the Yankees. I always felt like sometimes he didn't always get the respect by Yankee fans that he deserved because he didn't have the greatest first year, but if you take away that first year, he was tremendous for them. And he really carried them in that 2000 season down the stretch. And I just really felt like, to me, he did everything to try to fit in where I think A-Rod did as well, but A-Rod tried to force it too much where Clemens was really trying his best to just be one of the boys.
Well, everybody is different. And one thing I said, and look, I'm going to be really honest with you, Mike. I was not the perfect PR guy. I had a lot of faults of my own. I always used to say that my passion was my gift, but it's also my curse because I many times got too emotional. But I will tell you that I never met or worked with a more professional athlete than Roger Clemens.
Yeah.
And I think he was beloved after a while by Yankee fans. Now you take a David Wells or you take other people, everybody's different. Everybody had a different upbringing. And I always used to say to myself, when that player walks into the clubhouse and goes to his locker, I don't know what he's just experienced. Maybe before he got here, his wife said, "I won't be here when you get back." Or maybe he's got other issues. So they're not baseball cards. They're real people. And I'll tell you another thing. If you go into that job and you just want to be a fan, you can't be. You can't be a fan. You've got to be professional, and they've got to know that they can trust you,
Right?
And that you have their best interest at heart. And there were players like people say, "Well, who are the real bad guys? Well, there weren't bad guys. Now, some were more challenging than others, right? I mean, David Wells was more challenging for me than, say, David Kuhn, right? Or Andy Pettit, or Mariano Rivera, or Jimmy Key, or, different people. But that's part of the job. And I think David appreciated that I had his best interest at heart. There were times when I had to counsel him. I used to say to him, "Now, I'm going to say this. You can dismiss it if you want, but let me." He used to kind of make fun of that. But but I mean, David Wells was a good person, good family. I don't know David Wells's issues or
Yeah.
somebody else's issues. I mean, but we had a lot of. Let's think about the people that came through that clubhouse when Cecil Fielder and Darryl Strawberry and Doc Gooden and David
Yeah.
Justice and Kenny Lofton and
Gary Sheffield.
Gary
Yeah.
Sheffield.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a lot of
A-Rod.
Jim
Yeah.
Brown, A-Rod. Man, I remember one time walking into the clubhouse in Chicago, and the clubhouse guy says, "Well, the circus is back in town." And what he meant by that was that we had the most of everything. We had the most stars. We had the most batting practice pitchers. We had the most massage therapists. We had a mental skills coach. We had whatever. But I took that as a compliment, because what is the circus? The circus travels from city to city in a precise manner, does their job, and moves on. So I didn't take that as an insult, but we were the greatest show on earth.
And think about those 11 years, Rick, like all the guys that you dealt with. And I mean, that's really, when you get right down to it, it was a person's dream, a baseball fan's dream, because you got to be the public relations person, media relations for a team that you loved. And you also got to be a part of that dynasty that they would have in the late 90s and early 2000s. I mean, every year those playoff games were just great playoff games. The World Series were great World Series, and you got to experience that all. So when you look back on it, I mean, you've done so much in the game of baseball, but that's got to be the proudest moment of your career, was that run with the Yankees.
Well, yeah, and many things that we haven't talked about that happened in that run that are not wins and losses. It's doing something for somebody, or somebody who lost their father in 9/11 and becoming a part of their family, so to speak. Those are the things. I mean, we can do this in a second part or another time, but there's stories like, I'm watching the Academy Awards in 1998 from my couch and this is probably one of the 2 or 3 highlights of my career with the Yankees. I'm watching the Academy Awards by myself. And it was the 75th anniversary of the Academy Awards. So they had brought back, or the 70th, one of the two. And they brought back every living award winner, actress and actor. And they showed them, and they're all sitting like in bleachers, and they started in the upper left, and then they went across. It was alphabetical. And the last person they introduced was Teresa Wright, who portrayed Eleanor Gehrig in The Pride of the Yankees, but she had won an Academy Award for Mrs. Miniver, or The Little Foxes. She was nominated for an Academy Award for her first 3 movies, so that's pretty good. And there she was, this 80-ish-year-old woman, and it just hit me that, God, there's Eleanor Gehrig. We got to have her at the ballpark, have her throw out a first pitch. So I brought the idea to Mr. Steinbrenner, and he was all for it. It was like a Seinfeld episode. Go get her, get Teresa Wright. So I made a call to some people I knew at the Letterman show. How do I find Teresa Wright? And they gave me her agent's name. And I called this man up. His name was Francis Del Duca. And I told him that we'd like Teresa. We found out that she lived in Connecticut. We have to fly her across the country. So I tell Mr. Del Duca that we'd like to have Teresa throw out a first pitch, the game of her choice, whatever. And I'll never forget, he said, "Well, that's very nice. I'm sure she'll appreciate it, but quite frankly, I don't think she'll do it." I said, "Oh, why?" And he goes, "Rick, she's 80 years old or 79 years old." I said, "Well, she doesn't have to strike anybody out. She can hand the ball or underhand it." "Well, I'll ask her, but don't get your hopes up," or whatever. So the next day, my assistant says, "There's a Teresa Wright on the phone for you."
Oh, wow.
So I pick up the phone, and she's talking, and I'm talking to 24-year-old Teresa Wright or Eleanor Gehrig, and she was so excited. We picked the game, July 4th, the anniversary of the speech, and she came to the game, and we had lunch in the club with her and her grandson, and she says, "This is so exciting. I've never been to a baseball game." I mean, you've never been to a baseball game? Eleanor Gehrig. She goes, "Yeah, because it was just a role." I was finished the movie and I was on to I had barely seen the movie in 60 or whatever it was. But everything went perfectly. The fans were great. They gave her a big ovation. We showed the video of her dancing with Gary Cooper and she threw the ball. Tino Martinez gave her the perfect ending. Perfect ending to well, not quite. Because like 6 weeks later, I get a call from some gentleman, Dan Piccarini, who's a guidance counselor. And I took the call because he's a guidance counselor. I got to talk to, Mr. Dowds was the guy. And he goes, Rick, my name is Dan Piccarini, and I'm married to Teresa Wright's daughter, and we got a problem. I said, oh, boy, what is it? He goes, the woman will not leave the house for anything if the Yankees are playing. You can't get her out of the house if the Yankees are playing.
Yeah.
So he asked if she could come to one of the playoff games, which she did against Cleveland that year. Yeah. And now I'm getting these calls like the next year. Teresa's on the phone. Yes, Teresa. Rick, I didn't like the way David looked when he left the game last night. Is he okay? Rick, don't you think Joe's overusing the bullpen? This woman has become this wacko fan. So the end of the story is that we asked her to present Derek Jeter at the Black Tie Baseball Writers Dinner in 2000 with the Joe DiMaggio Toast of the Town Award. And she's sitting up there on the dais with Derek Jeter. They sat her next to Derek. And the next day, that picture was in the New York Times. And her daughter, Mary Kelly, called me and said, I want you to know that my mother told her friend so-and-so that having her picture in the New York Times with Derek Jeter meant more to her than winning the Academy Award.
Wow.
And after Teresa passed away in 2005, at like age 85 or so, 86, her daughter called me up and said, I want you to know that I could never express my gratitude for what you did for my mother. I'm like, what did I do for your mother? She goes, you didn't know this at the time that you made that call to her, but she had just realized at that moment that she couldn't act anymore, that she was done. She had made her last movie, The Rainmaker, and, she can't travel. She doesn't remember her lines the way she wanted to, but now she had the Yankees. And she said, I can't tell you what that meant to her. And I'm like, wow, that was not my intention.
Right.
But, if you just try to make someone's day, you might change their life. So,
and that has to be one of the most rewarding things of your Yankee tenure is that story right there. And, getting her to be a Yankees fan like she was, that had to be so gratifying for you.
Well, if we do a second part, I will give you another great story.
Yeah. And Rick, I want to thank you for coming on tonight. And we definitely are going to do a second part. We're going to talk about that great 98 Yankees team in part 2. We're also going to talk about, you brought up 9/11, and I know there were a couple interesting stories there as well. And we're also going to talk about Baseball Digest. But I do want to thank you for coming on for part 1 tonight. There you go, folks.
It's on sale now. Let's play ball. You see that, what we wrote on the cover? Let's play ball.
Yeah, and let's hope by the next interview we are playing ball. But thank you again for coming on. I can't wait for part 2. And tremendous job tonight. And I wish you the best of luck going forward. So Thank you again.
Thank you,
Rick.
Mike.
Take for Hometown Heroes. That's Rick Cerrone. I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone.